Jeff, welcome to the Power Within You podcast. It's really lovely to have you here with me today. I was joking about your background earlier, but now I realise where you are. It's a beautiful place where you're staying. Tell me more about how you are and what you're up to today.
Yeah, so today I'm coming to you all from the Bhaktivedanta Manor. It's in Watford. It's a Hare Krishna temple, and has a long history, longer than I probably am aware of. Um, yeah, and yeah, it's a beautiful place, and yeah, kind of fitting for I guess the topic we're talking about. Just
Yeah, absolutely. And the things I can relate to it so much because I went there a lot, as I said, when I was younger. Maybe forced to sometimes to go to festivals and stuff. But I do appreciate it a lot now. But it's a beautiful place for sure. And I'm really glad that you're able to experience that yourself. But it's really lovely to have you here. And your journey and your story is so super interesting. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into like you and your journey. So tell me, I want you to unfold your story with the listeners. And so tell me I know that you are originally from the US. Tell me when your journey began for mental health. Like what was it that kind of has turned your pain into passion?
yeah, I mean, really, there was a turning point, and it's kind of coincidental that I'm here in Europe talking about it because it was actually after I got back from a trip in Europe with a partner of mine maybe 8 years ago. And, I had been doing a bunch of healing work for about over a little bit over a decade to that point. And, yeah, and I got back from this trip and I realized I came back to my life and was like, I'm just not happy with it. You know, I'm kind of in this place where I feel stuck. And I wanted to change things around. So I heard about this job working in trauma and substance abuse in a mental health program in the US. And it was like, it was outdoor kind of education. And I had never done anything like that. I had been working in restaurants and all of that for a while. And my friend knew a guy who worked there and, was like, hey, he might be your reference, give him a call and talk to him. And I gave it a go and I talked my way into the job because usually you need like
Experience. Yeah, I was going to say.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, I've just been through so much and this is the work I'd done and I could, talk my way out of a box, like, so yeah, it was yeah, really good experience. About 5 years of that work. Yeah.
What did it involve that work? What did the trauma work involve for 5 years?
Yeah. So I worked initially with adult men in substance abuse, and I think the first guy I ever like had contact with, who was a client of mine, was actually a sociopath. So
Wow. Okay.
it was a chess game. So, so
Indeed.
yeah. So after that, I started working with the women, and I found just kind of more of a resonance over in that sphere. I felt like a lot of my own trauma kind of was just compatible with the experiences, and so my ability to help was a little more stronger in that arena. And yeah, and so it was interesting. I ended up working with the women, and it was a lot of it was um, you know abuse, and so
Hmm.
there was a lot of co-occurring issues. So substance abuse mixed with sexual abuse, etc. And yeah, so it was a very strong experience, and but I ended up becoming a supervisor over there, and
Wow,
yeah, and then worked
that's
with
amazing.
yeah, yeah, it was great. Especially as a male, it was very interesting for me because I felt like I had a very special role, just
Mm.
to maintain a sense of safety and create a safe space and experience with a male figure.
Yeah, and I think that it's a wonderful thing to be able to support people who be going through this trauma, and the help that is needed, because obviously, looking at our society, things are sort of swept under the carpet. Things aren't talked about really, and especially women, men and women find it very difficult to express the trauma that's happened to them. It often happens, or the trauma appears later in life, even if what happened to them was when they were younger, for example, with childhood abuse and things like that as well. Was there any sort of patterns that you saw with people in terms of, sort of types of, different sort of ages or areas or social, sort of, sometimes, you think about social class and diversity and backgrounds and that sort of stuff. Or was it like from all walks of life that you were seeing this trauma?
Yeah, it was from all walks of life for sure. It was,
Yeah.
I think that type of trauma is very, it doesn't discriminate.
No, exactly. Were you able to, have you been through your own sort of mental health journey yourself, like, to kind of be able to relate to other people and be able to help, do you think?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we can go into that for sure. I mean, my issues started as a young person, very like from a very early age, and I think with a lot of people, we kind of have this, like you said, like things get unearthed as you grow older. And sometimes you're not able to process them when you're at a younger age, and so I had a lot of different mental health issues, early on, like fourth grade, as in primary school, and what it looked like initially was ADD, and but it quickly evolved. My grades began to sink, excuse me. My grades began to sink, and and it was it was just kind of a downward spiral over the years. It turned into obsessive compulsive disorder, and then it turned into what they thought was Tourette's syndrome. So I had this neurological, but they ran neurological tests on me, and I know you can't really like run neurological tests for Tourette's syndrome, but there was nothing in my brain scans or anything that was abnormal or anything like that. So they really didn't know what was going on with me, and it got to the point where I had to get taken out of school when I was in middle school and couldn't function. It was kind of devastating for my social life, etc. So,
How old were you then when they took you out of school?
I must have been in 8th grade. Yeah.
So young, isn't it, as well, to have to go through all of those things, but also like to be put through all those tests as well, like go from ADD to OCD, to Tourette's. They're very different. They present very different symptoms, those disorders, basically, as well. So, and I don't know whether research and those kind of tests have improved, but was it because you're showing signs of each of those? Because OCD can present itself in very many different ways, and so does ADD as well, right? So,
yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. What it really looked like the ADD looked like I just couldn't focus in school, right? What it was trauma, in the end. If you look at Gabor Mate, he talks about what early childhood trauma looks like, and as much of what I experienced.
I mentioned Gabor Mate I think I mention it every single episode. I look like it when I speak about it. Yeah, he's amazing, right? Like he's provided us with so much knowledge, I think, because he's got ADHD himself, I think, as well, and he's able to like look at that. But sorry, yes, he's amazing. He's amazing. But you're right, it comes from childhood trauma for sure. But it feels like your trauma happened very quickly in childhood rather than adulthood. That must have been very difficult for you.
Yeah, what I think really, I think when you have a family system, and what I've learned about family systems is that one person can be the carrier of the trauma,
Hmm.
and or the scapegoat. And for me, that was really my experience, and it goes farther back than just my trauma. I think that's important because, and I think that relates to the clientele that I worked with in mental health, because, like I said, it doesn't discriminate. And
Mm.
well, we see that because it's in our lineage, it gets passed down to us. And if we look in the past 100 years, where all of where we came from, like we went through 2 world wars, and yeah, and my grandfather grew up on the island of Malta during World War II.
Really?
And
Wow. Okay.
yeah, and he grew up in a bomb shelter, and
Mm.
so I mean, he came over to the U.S. shell shocked, and not no one had the consciousness or awareness to know how to handle any of that. So the greatest generation, the 50s, and look at like domestic abuse and stuff like that. It was huge back then.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time, isn't it? Like partition happened in India as well. Like so, mass migration of the trauma of like all these people moving and
Oh God.
around, and the trauma of that as well, and the wars, and that all happened at the same time. Pretty much all happened at the same time. And you're right about the domestic abuse and stuff as well. Like I think when men went to war, women took on the roles of those men, and when they came back, they had to go back to the treated as going into those gender roles of looking after. And I think that's unfortunately, that's it kind of steps people back into progress, I think, as well. And things like domestic abuse and mental health and stuff were hidden. And instead, people were just given drugs or sent to institutions and, sectioned and that sort of stuff as well. It wasn't really dealt with, like you said. People certainly didn't know what PTSD was, back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when you had to get out of school, what did your journey look like after that?
Yeah, well, thankfully, I ended up going back into school at the end of the year,
Amazing.
and they had tried a bunch of different things, muscle relaxers and stuff, because the way it had kind of reared its head with the obsessive compulsive disorder was, I was in these rituals because I was afraid that something bad would happen, that that I might die. Like I was like doing all these like little things to manage my life, to manage all these fears that I had that were, and a lot of it, and I can go into, just a little bit of the trauma
Mm,
too, as
please, yeah.
yeah, and a lot of it had to do with sexual abuse too, and what I didn't understand was, a lot of it was me, like fears of unwanted sexual advances from people, and people like, just yeah, these power dynamics,
Mm,
that I was afraid of, succumbing to, or somehow having control over me.
mm,
And and then with the Tourette syndrome, it came out as just like bodily shaking, like I
mm,
couldn't, yeah, I couldn't, I would, and if you look at stuff like, there's a trauma release experiencing, which is like TRE, and it's
mm,
a method of like working with trauma,
mm,
and it's a somatic kind of method. And if you look at like the work of Peter Levine, like he talks about like how animals in the wild will go after a traumatic event and they'll shake. And
mm,
it was much of what I've experienced, and I still have a little bit of it today. Um,
mm,
yeah, and so it was just like, I couldn't manage my life. I couldn't even focus on my schoolwork, and that I ended up getting on Zoloft, and I kind of was able to manage my symptoms. But that's what drugs do. They manage your
Yeah.
symptoms.
They don't help you process them, right? They
Yeah.
stop the shakes maybe, or the thoughts, or make you a bit numb, but they don't, and it's necessary sometimes if you're in such a bad way that you can't manage it, right? As well. But did you have a support network as well around you when you were that young?
No, and the thing is that my trauma was with my family,
Mm,
and it was my direct caregivers, so my father specifically, and you know, and there's for me on my end, when abuse happens at such a young age, like, sometimes you don't know where the trauma comes from in other
sure,
instances,
sure.
and yeah, and so my experience was really just like I went into high school and I was on Zoloft, and then it started coming out like I had my freedom, and so I could express like my anger finally. And so it came out
Mm.
in very self-destructive patterns and behaviors, and yeah, yeah, and I just became a juvenile delinquent as any,
That's predicted,
yeah, as
right?
predicted,
That's society, right? Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. But it's so misunderstood, isn't it? Because, and also because you've gone through puberty, you've got those hormones running through you as well. Like, it's that anger and the frustration, and, it's, especially if and I'm really sorry to hear that trauma came from your family. It must have been incredibly difficult for you to manage it. And then I can't imagine what it'd be like without that family support, if that family is causing your trauma, like it must be even harder for you.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting, and I've said this, I said this in talking to somebody else the other day, but what really, I think, it might sound funny, but what really saved my butt was I found punk rock,
Mm.
and
Music always helps, eh?
yeah, and it was not just that, but it was also a social identity, and
Sure.
the politics were healthy enough to bring some social awareness to issues that that I could resonate with on a deep level, even if I didn't know what they were.
Mm.
And that, yeah, that's what allowed me to kind of have a sense of self and a
Yes.
wherewithal. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't have an identity, or you haven't grown up with an identity of who you are, or taught that as well, it's very difficult to understand who you are. And so you're floating around, aren't you, really trying to figure that out? So it was amazing that you were able to, have an identity through punk rock. And I think that's, it's amazing. And I'm sure that sort of stabilized you as well. Um, did you, were you still on tablets or drugs when you were like going through your teenage years and into early adulthood?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. Is I was on the Zoloft for
Mm.
about 3 years, and towards the end of my high school years, I had started taking it more infrequently. Just forgetting to take it, and so eventually I just was like, "Do I really need this?" And I kind of phased out of it, and for a good period of time, I ended up my later years in high school were probably the most difficult, and I ended up not like graduating a year late, and ending up with some issues with self harm, and ending up in the psychiatric hospital. But it like that for me actually was kind of a turning point, because it was a wake up call that was like, okay, I'm older. I'm
Mm.
17, 18. I need to start thinking about like what I'm going to do with myself, because I see all my friends, and I see a lot of them going down like really dark paths, selling drugs, and going to jail and getting into trouble and whatnot. And I didn't have the grades or the ability, really at that point to go to college. And I actually uh, and I saw how my family kind of used money to kind of control my brother with college,
Mm.
kind of hold it over his head and hold him in debt. And, you know, it was the reason why I didn't even get a car when I was in high school or anything like that, which is
Mm.
popular in the US. And
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That must have been, and also, so you're stuck really, aren't you, at that age and going, what do I do next? Especially if your friends getting into trouble and stuff like that. How did you manage to get through that period? Like, what did you have any? Because I always think about therapy and extra help, but obviously you went through such a hard time, you know, going to that psychiatric unit and stuff. Did you get any extra support that you needed from there?
well, I'll tell you this, yeah, my parents had put me in counseling since a very young age, and yeah, and it was helpful to some degree. But it was always kind of, you know, I didn't have the material available inside me. I wasn't aware enough. I wasn't able
Mm.
to, you know, resource because I didn't feel safe. So how could I remember what had, you know, how could I, you know,
It must be so confusing that apparently the people causing you trauma are putting you into counselling. So
yeah,
it must be it's a bit of a fucked up cycle, isn't it, really, of trying to figure that out.
yeah. And, you know, you could think of it like in an instance as, you know, maybe a manipulation or, you know,
Mm.
trying to
Yeah,
kind of
yes.
manage
Control.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And but it was also a blessing too because it like, you know, geared my mind that like there was help available.
right.
And while it wasn't helping me like really, and I like wasn't really getting much out of it at the time, you know, it kind of set the stage for later when I actually was able to, you know, start to process things that like, oh, I'm able to reach out and, you know, I don't have, you know, I don't have to do this alone, or that like I am alone and then who knows what happens. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Wow. It's gosh, it's so hard to even imagine. You want to put yourself in someone's shoes, but it's hard for me to do that because it feels like you've been through so much, you know, as well. And I'm so sorry that you had to experience it as a child, you know, coming into adulthood. And it's amazing and so inspirational that you found yourself through healing and through, we talked about Kundalini yoga, didn't we? And going to the Gurdwara and things like that. When did that healing journey start for you, do you think?
Yeah. Well, it took a minute. So
I bet, I'm sure it did.
I'll give you maybe the abbreviated the story. But you know, so I left. I realized that, you know, what was going on in my, you know, for me, I needed to make a change. And you know, what really was the turning point was me ending up in the psychiatric unit. And so, you know, I started thinking about, you know, what am I going to do? How am I going to get out of, you know, Detroit where I was living, or outside of Detroit? I wasn't directly in the city. The city's much rougher than the
I've
suburbs.
been to Detroit. Yeah, I went in the 1980s. It's probably a bit better then, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, it's still not an easy place. But so I had a friend who actually, you know, this is an interesting story. I had a friend who was dating a squatter in Detroit in the city. And, you know, this was the whole punk rock thing. And, you know, there's a whole culture of riding freight trains, within this community. And it dates back like, you know, back to the 30s and the Great Depression and
Mm.
stuff. And so you know, I got really nerdy about it and started like, you know, talking to people and reading books, and I ended up, you know, setting out when I was 19, well, 18 initially, but 19 for seriously, and left home for good. and rode freight trains around the United States for about 6 months to 9 months. Yeah. And
Wow, what an experience that must have been.
yeah, it was very, it was romantic at the time, but looking
It
back,
is romantic. Yeah.
yeah. But it's very dangerous, and I almost died several times. So
Really, wow. Yeah, I bet. I mean, you watch the movies, right? People just jumping on and off those freight trains, and yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're stuck out in the elements, and I mean, it's just compounded trauma, really. Like being on the street, and then like why you end up on the street, it just compounds on itself. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And so from that point onwards, you sort of started, I guess, your journey, right? Like, you're on the trains, and then, from that point onwards, were you able to kind of like take it step by step to kind of heal and, kind of be able to find yourself, the person that you are authentically?
yeah. Yeah. So really, yeah. I ended up on a farm in the winter time that winter when I left, and it was a vineyard in California, and and
Nice.
yeah, and I met a guy who was from Italy, and he was 8 years older than me, and he kind of saw that I was in a difficult position, and since I had gotten space from my family, my emotions started to become more and more dysregulated. And my experience with it was that just like I was, beginning to feel safe enough to feel what I had pushed down for so long. And so as I was, feeling it as it was coming up, I was kind of making sense of it. And my parents actually flew me back out to Detroit for Christmas that year. And it's at that point when I started to really remember what had happened. And I told yeah. And so within that period of time, going back to California after Christmas, my life was just completely like in ruins. Like,
Yeah, 'cause that's it. It's hit you, right? And it surfaced up, right? It came up, and yeah.
yeah. And
Oof. What did that look like for you? What did that feel like for you?
oh, it was, I mean, I had initially told my brother what I thought, yeah, what had come up for me. And there's just a dissonance, because he's still in it, and my sister, she's still in it, and there's that family system, and I had exited it, and
Were you the eldest of the siblings?
I was the middle child, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so I had the opportunity to learn from what I saw happening to my brother, and yeah, and so coming back to the farm, this guy from Italy, he was a photographer, and he had said he wanted to take pictures riding trains with me, and I still didn't really understand what it was. I told my brother, but I still after coming back to the farm, I just kind of disconnected from it. And it wasn't until I decided I had to leave the farm, and Andrea, my friend from Italy, came with me, that everything really started really deteriorating. And he knew I was in trouble, and he didn't really know what was going on. And he told me, I just saw him a few months ago, and he told me, he had been talking to his therapist about me and asking how he could help me.
Bless him.
Yeah. And, yeah, it was, he just held space for me. And it was like the biggest thing he could do, because all I wanted to do was run away and push him away, and he just kept coming back as this steady space
Secure
holder.
person. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
And
exactly what you need, but you don't know you need it at the time, right?
yeah, yeah. And finally he I broke down and we were on the beach in Venice Beach. I broke down crying and just told him what happened. It just kind of came out of me. And from that point on, I was like, okay, time, like I need to find a place to settle down and like work on myself. And it was just kind of like, you know, when you decide something, I feel like the universe like just kind of opens doors for you. And
it does.
Yeah, it's just been, yeah. It's a wild ride.
Moment, right? A profound moment to be able to feel that as well. But and some people unfortunately don't have that moment. It's still there. It's there for forever, and it's hard to process. And I'm so pleased to hear that you're able to have that profound moment as well. We're able to, and also want to work on yourself, and also want to get better, as well for you, and heal yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. What did that healing look like for you? What has it looked like for you?
Yeah, well, it took several years, and I mean, I ended up across the country once more, and in Asheville, North Carolina. Yeah, and it looked like, really me just kind of following my nose. I ended up in the psychiatric ward one more time, and then I ended up getting on medication again. And just enough to keep me stable, so I could. My therapist described me as a leaky box at that time. She's like, you're just a puddle. You have no coping skills, no way to contain what you're going through, and so that was really like the initial point of the journey, was just like developing ways to like self-regulate, developing ways to. And then like finding a job, finding stability, and going from there. And it's just my own need to survive that like kept me on the path of like healing, because and it's just like I'm also just a curious person, and I just don't want to stop digging. So
yeah, no, and that's the thing, right? That's what makes life interesting, and being able to like help yourself and help other people. You talked about self-regulating. I think we are not very good at that as humans. We should be. It's a part of us that we should know about, and our emotions, but we're not taught ever, or it's never processed. Could you give some advice on, or your experience of how you're able to regulate your emotions and self-regulate? Is there any advice you can give?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the initial things, I'll share some tools, and then and then maybe I'll share some key points that I talk about in the work that I do.
Yes, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So really, like, in my journey, one of the things that was primary was a lot of like bilateral work, and we see that now with like EMDR and stuff like that. Which, if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's eye movement deprocessing, or eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And so, what that looks like is for me initially was like EFT. So the emotional freedom technique. I know I'm throwing around a lot of jargon here, but
I like it. Do it more.
So EFT was fantastic for me, because it was, it's kind of like a hug, and there's a protocol that you do, and so you start with a karate chop, and you repeat this protocol, and I'll just give you a little piece of it. It's like, even though I'm feeling distressed, I still deeply and completely and unconditionally love and accept myself. Even though, and you go through and you talk about all the feelings that you're feeling at the moment. And then you finish the protocol, and you go back through and you tap in all the things that you want to be feeling. And so you're acknowledging like what you're going through. And I think that's the biggest issue, is people have this like pushback. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this. And they like try and hide. But
we are feelings. That's the core of us. The core of us is feelings and emotions, right? We have to recognize that's the whole problem of what we're going through at the moment. We just don't process our feelings. and emotions.
Yeah.
Just it's easier to push it down. It's easier to feel, just be numb. And I think that's a wonderful technique that you just shared.
And we like to put it on, and that's another thing is like, we like to project and we like to put it on other people or play the victim. And, I think, the healing has its own experience with that. Like, there's a time and a season for everything. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, going through these sort of techniques and tools that you've learned, I'm sure you use yourself currently as well. How do you use this in your work that you do with other people?
Yeah, absolutely. So my project, The Bridge Within, it's an initial speaking engagement, and then it's also a workshop series. And so I just developed it. It's kind of a drama based healing project, and so I focus on three main things. I focus on empathy, I focus on reframing, and I focus on goal setting.
Nice.
And it's kind of very parallel to what we just did with like EFT. And so empathy is, so we're having empathy for our emotions with the EFT thing. We're having empathy for ourselves. We're understanding those pieces of ourselves. And this is another, modality that really helped me was internal family systems therapy. So it breaks yourself down into parts. And so we're having empathy for the parts of ourselves that are in distress. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling anxious, And so empathy also extends into the outer world. When we're able to have empathy for other people, it kind of sets us up to be able to forgive. And forgiveness always happens for us. We don't forgive for other people. And so we do it to be able to let go of the past so we can be present and live our lives, which is what, trauma really keeps us from doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like an amazing series of workshops. Like, who are they intended for, those workshops?
I have them initially set for youth, so 15 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah, I have a real passion and want to work with young people, because I think that's that age where you can just really get into that and really help shape and change their lives and, help them fulfill their potential, especially with the goal setting exercise as well and the reframing as well, right? It's an amazing thing to do with young people. Are you working with young people at the moment?
Well, so back a few months ago, I was working in a summer camp. Sorry, I was working in a summer camp in Romania, and it was a wonderful experience. It's called Tabara Happy Faces. It was in Alba Iulia, and I had the chance to work with some amazing teenagers there, and went through several groups of kids and did some workshops with them. I initially came over here to London to work with Centrepoint, and then to do some work with Arlington House in Camden. And unfortunately, due to just like the economic situation and restructuring, it hasn't panned out. But I'm looking to do some work in Scandinavia and Sweden next.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, amazing! What will you be doing there?
Well, initially, really, I'm hoping to get some sponsorship behind me to take this project, to students and young people in different municipalities there. So yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. I've been to Stockholm a lot. I used to work for a Swedish company. I was in tech for 20 years. Okay. And my previous company was Swedish, so I always go to Stockholm. It's an amazing place, and the Swedes are amazing as well. I think it'd be, if you could smash it there. I mean, it'd be incredible to see workshops there. But I think, it's such a shame that Centrepoint thing didn't work out, because I really do think we need that here a lot. You know, like it's something which, you know, it's budget, it's, you know, the time and getting that into teachers and schools. It's really difficult, isn't it, as well, to kind of put those workshops around. But I think it's incredible what you're doing. And I hope it works out in Sweden as well. You'll love it there. Have you been there before?
No, I haven't. No, I do have
Yeah, you'll really like it.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
cold in the winter.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Lovely in the
absolutely.
summer.
I do hope and plan to come back to England as well, because, and Great Britain just in general, because
Yeah, no, absolutely.
uh,
That'd be amazing. What's your aspirations then for the next few years? What would you like to kind of be doing?
yeah, well, and really, I'd really like to get this project to take off and to reach a lot more people. I have a friend who I might be collaborating with a little bit in Sweden, and I have a book that I just wrote that I'm working on raising some money to get it published. It's called The Bridge Within.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and it's
Amazing.
my story.
And you have a story to tell as well. Like it's an incredible story, incredible journey, and what you've kind of achieved through it, and you know what you're doing now is really inspirational. I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. I know it must be hard sometimes to talk about these things.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that.
No problem. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to know more about your program and what you're doing with young people?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can reach out to me at mybridgewithin@gmail.com. You can get in touch with me on my LinkedIn post, Jeff Spiteri, Spiteri. And I should have my website back up in a little bit. The website is www.thebridgewithin.com. But until then, email and LinkedIn are best. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I have one last question for you before I let you go. How do you find the power within you to manage your mental health now and for the future?
Yeah, you know, I think it is its goal. It has a lot to do with goals, because you know, every day when and reframing too, because when something goes wrong in my life, you know, I can look at it as you know, a detriment to me, or I can look at it as like a teacher, and so I always try and be the student, and as far as goals, yeah, I mean that's what's kept me alive, you know, is what's next, what is in my heart, like what do I desire, what do I want my life to look like, and you know, and don't stop striving for it, but also like letting go, you know. There's I'll leave you with this prayer. It's the Serenity Prayer. I'm sure a lot of people know it, but it's they use it in Alcoholics Anonymous a lot, and it's, you know, God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So just let go, you know, send out your wish, and you know, and it'll show up, and it might not be how you expect it, but it'll be good.
Yeah, it will be beautiful. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing your journey with us. I've had a wonderful conversation with you, and please get in touch with Jeff if you want to know more about his workshops. But thank you, Jeff, for joining me today.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.